Hello everyone. In today's video, I bring you a story that will challenge everything you know about life, death, and the universe. Let's get to know Lucian Calloway, who at 17 had a near-death experience that led him to discover something unimaginable, the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations. That's right. He saw with his own eyes that we are not alone in the universe. What he experienced on the other side is so extraordinary that it will leave you speechless. So before we begin, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any amazing content like this, and turn on the notification bell to get all the updates. Now, get ready for a journey that will change your perspective on existence. Let's go. My name is Lucian Calloway, and I have a story to tell that might change the way you see the world. Today, at 67 years old, I've decided to share something I've kept to myself for half a century. When I was 17, I went through an experience that completely transformed my perception of life, death, and everything that exists between those two extremes. I was born and raised in Elmsville, Texas, a small town where everyone knows each other. I was an ordinary teenager, with dreams and expectations typical for my age. I was never particularly religious or spiritual, and my life was following a normal course until that fateful night. Since that day, I've been reflecting on what happened, trying to make sense of what I saw and felt. This isn't just a story about a near-death experience. It's about a deep truth, something much greater than we as human beings are prepared to understand. I decided to share my story now because I feel it's important. Perhaps there are others out there who've gone through something similar and feel alone or misunderstood. I want them to know they're not alone. And for those who've never had such an experience, I hope my story can open your mind to possibilities that go beyond our everyday understanding. What I'm about to tell you may seem unbelievable, even fantastic. I only ask that you listen with an open mind. I'm not here to convince anyone or preach some absolute truth. I'm here to share my experience as honestly as I can, in the hope that it might bring some light or comfort to those who hear it. So let's go back 50 years in time, to a night that started like any other but ended up changing the course of my life forever. It was a Saturday night like many others in Elmsville. I was 17 years old and felt invincible, as all teenagers do. I went to a party with some older friends, something that wasn't unusual but that I definitely shouldn't have been doing. At that time, I was taking medication for a knee injury. The doctor had specifically warned me not to mix the meds with alcohol, but in my youthful arrogance, I thought I knew better. What a colossal mistake. I vividly remember arriving at the party. It was in an old house on the outskirts of town, far from the watchful eyes of parents and neighbors. The music was loud, the lights were low, and the air was heavy with the smell of beer and cigarettes. My girlfriend, Madeline, was with me. She was more sensible than I was and warned me several times to take it easy with the drinking. "Lucian, you shouldn't be drinking. What if something goes wrong?" she said, the worry clear in her eyes. But I didn't listen. I was feeling good, the pain in my knee almost non-existent thanks to the meds, and the alcohol gave me a false sense of confidence. I drank one beer, then another, and soon lost count. As the night went on, I began to feel something strange. At first, it was just a slight dizziness, nothing out of the ordinary for someone who had been drinking. But then, the sensation started to intensify. The world around me seemed to be spinning faster and faster. I remember leaning against a wall, trying to steady myself. The voices and music started to sound distant, as if they were coming from underwater. I saw Madeline approaching, her expression a mix of anger and concern. "Lucian, are you okay?" she asked, but her voice seemed to come from far away. I tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come out. My vision began to darken around the edges, as if a black tunnel was closing in around me. The last thing I remember was seeing Madeline's face turn to pure terror before everything went completely black. I had collapsed. My heart had stopped. At that moment, for all intents and purposes, I was dead. What happened next is something I've struggled to describe even after all these years. There was no pain, no fear, just a sensation of smooth movement, as if I was being carried by an invisible current. The darkness around me wasn't frightening, On the contrary, it was comforting, like I was wrapped in a soft, warm blanket. There was no sense of body, no sense of time or space. It was as if I had become pure consciousness, floating in an infinite void. Then, in what felt like both an instant and an eternity, I perceived a distant light. It wasn't like any light I'd seen before. It was bright, yes, but not blinding. It was welcoming, calling to me silently. As I approached the light, I began to feel a deep, inexplicable peace. All the fears, worries, and pains I had ever experienced in my life seemed insignificant in the face of this overwhelming serenity. The light grew stronger, more intense, until suddenly I found myself in a completely different place. It was a vast field, covered with gigantic flowers I had never seen before. These flowers were larger than anything I could have imagined, with petals that seemed to radiate their own light. The most surprising thing was that these flowers weren't just plants. Somehow, I knew they were alive in a way that goes beyond our understanding of life. They moved gently, as if they were dancing to a silent melody. And then, something even more incredible happened. The flowers began to communicate with me. There were no words, no sounds, but I could perfectly understand what they were transmitting. It was a language of pure emotion and meaning, without the limitations of spoken words. They spoke to me about the interconnectedness of all things, about how every living being, every particle in the universe, is part of a greater whole. They conveyed concepts of universal love, compassion, and understanding that went far beyond what I had ever imagined possible. As I absorbed these messages, I realized I was moving again. I wasn't walking in the traditional sense, but gently floating towards something even grander. Ahead of me, I saw an even more intense light, brighter than anything I had ever seen. Instinctively, I knew that this light wasn't something ordinary. It was something divine, something beyond human comprehension, and I was about to encounter it. As I approached the intense light, I felt a profound change within me. It was as if every part of me was being filled with an unconditional love, a love so pure and powerful that it defied any description. When I finally reached the light, I was completely enveloped by it. It wasn't just a light that I could see, it was something I could feel in every fiber of my being. It was as if I had dived into an ocean of pure love and understanding. In that moment, I felt the strongest sense that I was home, not the physical home where I lived in Elmsville, but the true home of my soul. It was as if I had spent my entire life searching for something without knowing what it was, and I had finally found it. And then, something even more extraordinary happened. I began to receive answers. They weren't spoken or written answers, but an instant and profound understanding that arose within me. Every question that passed through my mind was immediately answered. What is the purpose of life? Love. Why do we exist? To learn and evolve. What happens after death? A continuation of the journey on a different plane of existence. The answers came not in words, but in sensations and understandings that seemed to fill my entire being. It was as if every cell in my body perfectly understood what was being transmitted. In that elevated state of understanding, I could see how all things are interconnected. I saw how every action, every thought, every choice we make has an impact on the whole. I realized that time, as we know it, is an illusion, and that past, present, and future exist simultaneously in an eternal now. I understood that the life we live on Earth is just a small part of a much greater journey, that our souls are eternal, and we come to Earth to learn specific lessons and grow spiritually. Amidst all these revelations, I felt a presence. It wasn't a figure or a form I could describe, but a vast and loving consciousness. I understood that I was in the presence of something divine, something that some might call God, but that went beyond any religious concept I knew. This presence conveyed to me a feeling of total acceptance and unconditional love. There was no judgment, no condemnation for past mistakes. There was only understanding and a love so deep that it brought me to tears of joy. It was in this state of ecstasy and deep understanding that I asked a question that had never crossed my mind before. Are we alone in the universe? The answer I received changed everything I thought I knew about reality. The moment I asked the question about whether we are alone in the universe, everything around me changed drastically. The light that enveloped me expanded, and suddenly I found myself floating in outer space. But it wasn't space as we see in NASA photographs or science fiction films. It was something much vaster, much more alive. Before me, I saw entire galaxies spinning in a cosmic dance. Stars were being born and dying in explosions of light and color that defied imagination. And amidst all this cosmic spectacle, I saw something I could never have imagined. Life. Life on a scale and diversity that left me astonished. I saw planets, countless planets, each pulsing with its own vital energy. On some, I could see cities glowing with technologies beyond any human comprehension. On others, I saw forms of life so different from us that they defied classification. There were beings that seemed to be made of pure light, floating in atmospheres of gases that would be deadly to us. I saw creatures that lived in oceans of liquid methane, their civilizations flourishing in conditions we would consider impossible. There were worlds where life was silicon-based instead of carbon-based, evolving in ways that our scientists have only just begun to theorize. On some planets, I saw beings that resembled humans in some ways, but with subtle differences that spoke of evolutions under very different conditions from those on Earth. I saw civilizations that had achieved perfect harmony with their environments, using technologies that seemed indistinguishable from magic. But what impressed me the most were the beings that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. They pulsed with an energy that suggested a level of consciousness far beyond our own. I understood that these were ancient civilizations that had evolved into a state of being that we could barely comprehend. As I observed all of this, I was flooded with a profound understanding. We are not alone, not by a long shot. The universe is teeming with life, consciousness, and wonders that go far beyond our wildest imagination. I realized that Earth, all of human history, was just a grain of sand on an infinite cosmic beach. We were not the center of the universe, not even a particularly significant point in it. We were just one among countless expressions of life and consciousness scattered throughout the cosmos. This revelation was both humbling and liberating. Humbling because I realized how small and limited we were in our understanding of the universe. Liberating because I understood that we were part of something much greater, much more vast and wonderful than we could ever have imagined. At that moment, all earthly concerns, all disputes and conflicts that had seemed so important on Earth, dissolved into insignificance. I saw that we were all part of a great cosmic tapestry, each form of life contributing its own unique color and texture to the whole. And with this understanding came an overwhelming sense of responsibility. I understood that every civilization, every form of life, had a role to play in the grand symphony of the cosmos, and we humans had only just begun to play our part. As I was still trying to process the vastness of what I had seen in the cosmos, I was suddenly transported to a different space. It was a dark void, but not threatening. At the center of this void, I saw something I can only describe as a kind of board or giant screen, floating and slowly rotating. Suddenly, images began to form on this screen. I recognized them immediately. It was Earth. But it wasn't just the planet as we see it from space. It was the history of Earth, unfolding before my eyes like a sped-up movie. I saw the birth of our planet, a ball of fire and rock forming in space. I saw the first oceans forming, the atmosphere slowly changing. I witnessed the emergence of life, from the first microscopic cells to the dinosaurs, and finally, human beings. But it didn't stop there. I saw beyond the present, into a future that had yet to happen. I saw humanity evolving. I saw our cities grow and change in ways I could barely comprehend. I saw catastrophes and rebirths, wars and unprecedented periods of peace. The most surprising thing was that I could see all of this happening simultaneously. Past, present, and future were not linear as we perceive them. They were overlapping layers of reality, all existing at the same time. I understood that what we call history is not a linear progression of events, but a complex fabric of causes and effects, choices and consequences, all interconnected in ways that our linear minds can barely comprehend. I saw how every action, every decision made by every individual reverberated through time, affecting the course of history in unpredictable ways. A single act of kindness in one moment could lead to monumental changes centuries later. A selfish decision could trigger a chain of events that would alter the course of nations. I witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations we have never known, cultures that flourished and disappeared without leaving traces for our archaeologists to discover. I saw how humanity repeatedly reached great heights of wisdom and understanding, only to fall back into ignorance and start again. But amidst all these cycles of creation and destruction, I saw something else. A pattern. A slow but steady progression toward something greater. Each cycle took us a little further, a little higher. Each fall was followed by a rebirth that elevated us beyond where we were before. I understood that the history of humanity, with all its triumphs and tragedies, was part of a larger process of evolution. Not just physical evolution, but evolution of consciousness. Every experience, every lesson learned, took us one step closer to a greater understanding. And then, in the blink of an eye, I saw the end. Not just the end of humanity, but the end of Earth itself. I saw our planet grow old, the sun expanding and engulfing the inner planets. But even that wasn't a true end. It was a transformation, a rebirth on a cosmic scale. I was in awe of the beauty and complexity of it all. The history I had learned in school, the events I had lived through in my 17 years of life, were just a grain of sand on an infinite beach of time and experience. In that moment, I felt a profound humility, and, at the same time, a sense of connection with everything that has ever existed and everything that will ever exist. I understood that each of us, no matter how insignificant we may seem, is a vital part of this great cosmic story. As I absorbed all these incredible revelations, I felt a subtle change around me. The sensation of infinite expansion began to slowly contract. The visions of the cosmos and Earth's history started to dissipate, like clouds being blown away by the wind. At that moment, I realized what was happening. I was being called back. Back to my body, back to my life on Earth. And for the first time since this incredible journey began, I felt fear. How could I go back? How could I return to the small existence I had known after experiencing the vastness of the cosmos, the depth of divine love, the complexity of universal history? The idea of returning to my 17-year-old body, to the problems and limitations of human life, seemed unbearable. I tried to resist. I tried to cling to that light, to that unconditional love that had enveloped me. I didn't want to lose that feeling of connection with everything, that deep understanding I had gained. It was then that I felt a presence around me. It wasn't a physical presence, but a consciousness, or rather, multiple consciousnesses. They were beings of light, entities of pure energy and wisdom. I didn't see them with my eyes, but I felt them with my entire being. These beings began to sing. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but a vibration that resonated in every fiber of my being. It was the most beautiful and saddest music I had ever experienced. It was a song of farewell, but also of encouragement. Through this celestial music, they conveyed a clear message. My journey on Earth was not over. There was more for me to learn, more to experience, more to contribute. I tried to argue. I showed them everything I had seen and learned, insisting that I already knew enough, that I didn't need to go back. But they responded with infinite love and patience. They showed me that knowing was not the same as living, that understanding was not the same as experiencing. I saw flashes of my future, not specific events, but possibilities. I saw the impact I could have on other people's lives. I saw the lessons I still needed to learn, the experiences that would help me grow even more. Slowly, I began to understand. Life on Earth wasn't a punishment or an exile from that realm of light and love. It was a precious opportunity, a chance to live and grow in ways that were only possible in the physical world. Even so, The idea of leaving that state of grace and unconditional love was painful. I knew I wouldn't be able to take with me all the memories and knowledge I had acquired. I knew I would return to a world of limitations and challenges. But the beings of light assured me that I would never truly be separated from that greater reality, that the connection I had experienced would always be within me, even if I couldn't consciously access it. With one last farewell song, I felt myself being gently pushed back. The light began to fade, the unconditional love began to dissipate, and then, with a sensation of vertiginous falling, I was pulled back to my earthly reality. The transition back into my body was abrupt and disorienting. One moment, I was immersed in light and infinite understanding. The next, I was lying on the cold floor of a bathroom, my head throbbing and my whole body aching. The first thing I felt was the smell. The strong aroma of disinfectant mixed with the acidic stench of vomit filled my nostrils. It was a shocking contrast to the purity I had experienced moments before. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking against the fluorescent light that seemed to pierce my brain. The white, stained bathroom ceiling came into focus. I was back. Back in the physical world. Back in my 17-year-old life. The realization of what had happened hit me like a wave. All those incredible experiences, all those profound revelations, had they been real? Or had it all been just a dream, a hallucination caused by the dangerous mix of alcohol and medication? I tried to sit up, but my body protested. Every muscle ached, my mouth was as dry as paper, and my head pounded as if it were about to explode. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional pain I felt. I felt as if I had lost something precious, something I could never recover. The memories of my experience were already beginning to fade, slipping through my fingers like fine sand. It was then that I noticed something on the bathroom sink, a razor blade. And for one terrible moment, I had a thought I had never had before. What if I could go back? What if I could somehow return to that state of grace and understanding? My hand trembled as I reached for the blade, but before I could touch it, I heard a voice. It wasn't a physical voice, but the same voice I had heard in the realm of light. It was deep, powerful, and resonated not in my ears, but in my very soul. "No," said the voice simply. At that moment, the bathroom door opened. It was Madeline, her face a mixture of relief and concern. "Lucian, thank God you're awake," she exclaimed, rushing to my side. "You scared us so much." "What happened?" I looked at her, trying to find the words to explain. How could I describe what I had experienced? How could I make her understand the incredible journey I had been on? I think I died," was all I could say. Madeline looked at me with a mixture of confusion and concern. "What are you talking about, Lucian? You passed out. The paramedic said it was because of the alcohol mixed with your meds. You were lucky it wasn't worse." I realized then that there was no way to explain. There were no words in our language to describe what I had experienced, and even if there were, how could someone who hadn't been through the same thing possibly understand? I need to go home," I said, trying to stand up again. Madeline helped me to my feet, her worry evident in every gesture. "All right, I'll take you home, but promise me you'll see a doctor tomorrow, okay?" I nodded, not really hearing her. My mind was elsewhere, desperately trying to hold on to the last remnants of my experience before they disappeared completely. As Madeline guided me out of the bathroom, out of the party, I knew that my life would never be the same again. I had seen beyond the veil, had experienced something that few humans ever have, and now, I had to find a way to live with that knowledge in the everyday world. In the days and weeks following my experience, I found myself struggling to readjust to normal life. The world around me felt surreal, like a dream I couldn't wake up from. The everyday concerns that had once occupied my mind, school grades, football games, fights with friends, seemed trivial and insignificant compared to what I had experienced. I tried to tell Madeline what had happened. We sat in her room one afternoon after school, and I poured everything out. I told her about the light, about the unconditional love I had felt. about the visions of the cosmos and the history of Earth. I told her about the beings of light and the celestial music. Madeline listened patiently, her eyes widening as I told my story. When I finished, there was a long silence. Finally, she spoke. "Lucian, I don't know what to say. That sounds incredible, but are you sure it wasn't just a dream? Or maybe a hallucination because of the meds?" Her words, though gentle, hit me like a punch in the gut. Of course she couldn't understand. How could she? I could barely comprehend what had happened myself. I realized then that I couldn't share this experience with anyone else. No one would believe me, and even if they did, they couldn't truly understand. I decided to keep everything to myself, at least for the time being. The years went by, and I continued living my life the best I could. I finished high school, went to college, and started a career. But there was always a part of me that was somewhere else, reflecting on what I had seen and experienced that night. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I would wake up with the sensation of falling, echoes of that celestial music still resonating in my mind. In those moments, I felt a longing so deep it physically hurt, a longing for that state of grace, for that connection with everything that exists. I tried to find ways to reconnect with that experience. I read books on spirituality and philosophy, tried meditation and yoga. Nothing compared to what I had lived through. But those practices helped me find a little peace. It wasn't until years later, while watching an interview on TV, that I realized I wasn't alone. It was a show about near-death experiences, and people were describing things surprisingly similar to what I had experienced. The light, the feeling of unconditional love, the visions of the beyond. For the first time in years, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined it all. Other people had gone through similar experiences. I began researching the topic more, reading accounts from others who had had near-death experiences. While each experience was unique, there were common patterns that aligned with what I had lived. But even with this validation, I mostly kept my experience to myself. Occasionally, when I felt it was safe, I shared parts of it with those close to me. Some reacted with skepticism, others with fascination, but no one could truly understand completely. And so, I spent decades quietly reflecting on what had happened that night, trying to integrate that transcendental experience with my everyday life, trying to live in a way that honored what I had learned, even if I couldn't remember all the details. 50 years have passed since that fateful night, and here I am, at 67 years old, finally sharing my full story. The impact of that experience on my life has been profound and long-lasting, shaping who I have become and how I see the world. The certainty that we are not alone in the universe, that something much greater than us exists, completely changed my perspective. The petty concerns and everyday dramas that used to consume me lost much of their power over me. Not that I became immune to life's challenges, far from it. But I came to see those challenges as opportunities for growth, as part of a much larger journey. The unconditional love I experienced that night became my North Star, my moral compass. I began to seek ways to bring some of that love into the world around me. It wasn't always easy. The world can be a harsh and cruel place, and I often felt discouraged and overwhelmed. But whenever that happened, I remembered that light, that feeling of connection with everything, and I found the strength to keep going. My career took an unexpected turn. Although I started in business, as expected of me, I ended up turning to social work and psychology. I felt a calling to help people, to try to bring some of the light and love I had experienced to those who were suffering. I couldn't directly share my experience, but I could try to live according to what I had learned. My view of death also changed completely. Where there was once fear and anxiety, there is now a serene acceptance. Not that I am eager to die. There is still much I want to do and experience in this life. But the paralyzing fear of death that afflicts so many people no longer has power over me. I know that death is not the end, but a transition, a passage to something greater. This shift in perspective deeply affected my relationships. I came to value genuine connections with people much more, seeking to see the divine light in everyone, even in those who challenged or hurt me. Of course, I didn't always succeed. I'm human, after all. But this constant pursuit of connection and understanding has enriched my life immensely. My experience also left me with a deep appreciation for life in all its forms. The vision of the interconnectedness of all things led me to a much greater respect for the environment and for all the creatures that share our planet. I became a passionate advocate for environmental preservation and the ethical treatment of animals. Over the years, I occasionally encountered others who had had similar experiences. These encounters were deeply comforting and validating. Being able to share our stories, compare our experiences, was incredibly liberating. I realized that while my experience was unique in many ways, it was part of a broader phenomenon that many others had experienced. Now, at 67 years old, I feel it is time to share my story more widely. I am not trying to convince anyone or prove anything. My goal is simply to offer my experience as a point of reflection, a window into possibilities beyond what we normally consider real. For those who have had similar experiences, I hope my story can bring comfort and validation. You are not alone, and what you experienced is real and meaningful, even if it challenges our conventional understanding of reality. For those who have never had such an experience, I hope my story can open your mind to possibilities beyond what our five senses can perceive. There is more to the universe than we can see or touch, more mystery and wonder than our current belief systems can accommodate. Above all, I hope my story can inspire others to live with more love, compassion, and awareness of our fundamental interconnectedness. Because in the end, that is what my near-death experience taught me, that we are all part of something much greater, all connected by bonds of love that transcend our earthly understanding. I don't know what the future holds, nor what I will find when I finally cross the threshold of death for the last time. But I know that I will face that moment not with fear, but with serene anticipation, ready for the next chapter of this incredible journey we call existence. And to you, reader, I leave this thought. Live each day with the awareness that you are part of something vast and wonderful. Seek love in all things, even in the most challenging situations. And always remember that there is more to reality than our eyes can see or our minds can comprehend. The truth is greater than any of us can imagine. If you enjoyed this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to catch every new video and help us spread this message to as many people as possible. See you next time.